got some nice chemtrails out there in the sky today on this beautiful day. It's Bryan from Press for Truth. Just wanted to discuss some stuff that I've read on some recent reports about the G20 that came out from the OIPRD that released their report just yesterday, and the oversight committee for the RCMP, the federal oversight body for the federal police service, and they released their report at the beginning of the week. And there's also been some updates with some court cases as well. But let's go right back to the beginning. G20, 2010 in Toronto. 1,100 people get arrested. Only a fraction of those people that actually get arrested get charged with stuff, and an even smaller fraction of those people are actually found guilty of the charges that they're actually filed with. Now we go back to like one of the original reports that came out back in the winter of 2010, and it was the Ombudsman's report by Bryan, and he released a report, very scathing report of the police and their actions about the Public Works Protection Act is what he was looking at, the alleged 5-meter rule that turned out to be fake. Well, he released a very scathing report that said that the police actions were quote, illegal activity by the police, and that they did not have any authority to be randomly searching people, to be opening their bags, to be forcing them to identify themselves, all under an ancient law that was passed during World War II to prevent Nazi spies, German spies, from entering courthouses and other public buildings. So they declared the downtown core a public works, and then the police used this to make up a fake 5-meter rule that did not exist except in 3 discrete locations, which were entrances into the fenced-off area. And the rule was, if you didn't want to get ID'd, you just had to leave. They couldn't force you, constitutionally, they cannot force you to identify yourself. That brings us to the next case that came out after the G20, the one that gained a lot of media attention. That's the case of Adam Nobody. He's a young man walking home from the beer store on the Saturday, carrying a sign looking for his friend. As he walks through Queen's Park, he gets ambushed by 5 police officers from Toronto Police Service. They jump on him, they assault him, they break his cheekbone, they break his ocular bone, and they bash his face up pretty bad. And they decided to charge the one identifiable officer in the case, and that was Officer Gortani. So he was charged with assault. They closed the case. And then the OIPRD released their report on Adam Nobody's complaint. And because the OIPRD is able to compel officers to testify, they were able to identify the remaining 4 officers that the SIU said were unidentifiable and the Toronto police refused to identify. Once the officers were identified by the OIPRD, that's the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, they refused to reopen Adam's case. So he's left with the conclusion that crimes were committed, officers did assault him, but they're not going to reopen the case to charge those officers. And the OIPRD is not like the SIU. They cannot press criminal charges. They can only make recommendations. So they recommended to the police chief that that under the Police Services Act, that he punish and charge the officers involved. But because the police waited out the clock, the statute of limitations for assault had passed on Adam's case, so the remaining identified officers weren't charged with anything, even though they had determined that they had committed an offense. If this had been a person assaulting an officer, they would have railroaded the case immediately to court and charged the person to the full extent of the law. So there's this double standard when it comes to police committing crimes versus the public committing crimes. The police seem to have this, well, they have a shield, a protection against them. They can commit an offense, but if you do the same thing, you won't get away with it, they will. Just the other day as well, a man that was originally charged, his name is Bryan. He was originally arrested about 3 days before the summit took place, and he was charged with making explosives. They found chemicals on his property, determined that he was going to make explosives to use at the G20, and they charged him with that. Now, he's been under arrest and in jail for over a year. His marriage has fallen apart. He had to take out money to pay for all the legal fees. And at the end of the day, he gets to court and the judge ruled that the Crown's case, the Crown's argument that he was actually building bombs was ridiculous, that it was unfounded, because he's making model rockets. He's making model rockets out of the chemicals they found were used to make model rockets and not used to make bombs. So they threw the case out. They immediately found him not guilty, acquitted him of all charges, and the taxpayers are left to pay for the police trying to arrest some model rocket guy and send him to jail. That brings us to some newer reports that have come out in just the last few weeks. The first one that came out was by the RCMP watchdog, and they were looking at the RCMP's involvement in the G20, and what they determined were that the RCMP actually did a pretty good job of policing people during the G20. They only made less than a dozen arrests. I think it was 5 arrests, and you know, as it turns out, they didn't actually really have that much to do with a lot of the arrests. They were looking after the inner perimeter of the fence. They were looking after the delegates that were coming down to the city for the G20. So they were involved in what is known as a kettling drill that took place infamously at Queen and Spadina on the Sunday. When they arrived on scene, they were under control of the Toronto Police Superintendent, and the OPP officer who was supposed to be in charge on the scene, because it was a lot of OPP in that area, he was nowhere to be found for over 2 hours. So in their report, all they determined was that the RCMP should have better note-taking in the future, because they weren't sure why they had arrested 2 undercover police officers. Turned out to be 2 undercover Toronto police officers were 2 of the people that they arrested at Queen and Spadina, but they don't know why they got arrested because there were no notes taken on them. So the only criticism that the watchdog had for the RCMP was that they take better notes and that there's better coordination between different police agencies in the future. Other than that, they clearly stated that kettling is not something that the RCMP does. It is not part of their policy, and they will not be involved with that in the future. Now we get to the most recent report that has come out, and this one is from the OIPRD, the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. They released a report, a very scathing report, that said that the officers used excessive force, acted in an illegal manner, violated people's rights, and basically ignored the law to their own advantage to enforce draconian measures on that weekend. So the OIPRD is an oversight body, an arm's length agency that looks over the Ontario police services. All Ontario police services can be looked at by the OIPRD, but they can't press charges. They can only make recommendations, and their recommendations are non-binding. So they can make a recommendation and the police service can just say, we're not going to do that because we don't agree with your recommendation. End of story. Although the OIPRD can only issue recommendations to the police, I'm happy to say that because of their report yesterday and because of their criticisms of how the police handled themselves in an illegal manner and violated the rights of people that weekend at the G20, senior officers at the Toronto Police Service are in the process of being charged with offenses committed during the G20. But at the end of the day, all of these investigations are limited in the scale that they can investigate. What we really need is a full federal inquiry to hold the federal politicians responsible for bringing this to the city, for allowing the police to do what they did, and for this flagrant violation of our rights, the largest violation in Canadian history. We need to restore the trust in the police because we need them to arrest the real criminals, which are the international bankers and financiers of the world. Anyways, guys, I'll put links in the description to all of the appropriate material, to all of the reports, to the articles that I was reading, so that you can read the reports and the articles for yourself and decide for yourself how you feel about them. I'll also put links, videos of interviews that Dan Dix did with Adam Nobody, a great interview where he explains himself how he felt about the entire process of being beaten up by the police. And until next time, guys, I am going to leave you with that. Click on the links below, buy a copy of Into the Fire to help support what we're doing, or watch it online, and I'll talk to you guys later.